Descendants of the Three Sisters. A beginning.
He had earned the privilege to be told the truth, a truth that most native kindred would never learn. His was a keen intellect, always curious and questioning. It was a quality she'd come to admire and respect in the time they'd known each other. He had solid instincts and was one of the few kindred who had proven to be worthy of her deep trust. The native elder looked over at her visibly anxious companion and sighed heavily. Her use of such a decidedly human emotion underscored the seriousness of the situation.
You feel it already, don't you? The curse that taints this land. And we are only at the boundary.
There is a feeling of dread, I suppose, unlike anything I've ever felt before or since my embrace. I know it's silly, but for a moment I wanted to flee to my mother's comfort, which of course is impossible.
It's not silly to recognize danger and want protection from it, but be assured that any significant material threat to us has long passed this way,
the elder said gently as she patted his back.
Just remember this feeling and any other impressions you have from this night. There just might come a time when you find them useful.
She linked her right arm with his left and guided him forward down the hill towards the forest in the distance. He noticed immediately that as they walked, the brightness of the heavy moonshine on the strange murky brown and gray landscape began to decrease. The air was growing heavier with each step, and he had the distinct sensation of being tightly pressed from all sides. It was odd, being pushed and pulled at the same time.
There are certain kinds of evil that leave an imprint on this land,
came the elder's voice in his head.
Suffice it to say that this also attracts forces from around the region that are best left disengaged.
She peered into the darkness and could swear she saw a familiar face from long ago amongst the wraiths. It regarded her accusingly, and she looked away. She had the power to repel it and its compares, but was overwhelmed by pangs of guilt and shame, so refrained from using it. Her surrogate child could only wonder what it was that she was seeing and experiencing, the tension of which he could only feel. She would not speak further of them in the shadows, but the closer he and his mentor moved forward the forest, the more these forces made their presence known. She had fallen silent, and he couldn't help but feel somewhat relieved. He was already frightened enough for an entire clan, let alone just the two of them. He'd been struck by what a clear summer's night it was as they journeyed here, but by the time they reached the forest, it might as well have been the forbidding midwinter polar night he'd experienced in Barrow, Alaska. He looked backward at the hill he and his mentor had stood on. It was now bathed exquisitely in moonlight, taunting him like a precious jewel as the oppressive, shallowing darkness enveloped him. He turned around and lost the power of speech as his mind registered what was in front of him. When he finally found his voice again, that sound that came out approximated as a strangled gurgle at the sight of a ghostly ancient village of longhouses and wigwams looming preternaturally large in the distance.
What is that place exactly?
He rasped in a low whisper.
Shadowlands,
came her succinct answer.
Remember my instruction.
He thought back to what he'd been told not long ago. The elder had explained that the Shadowlands are a death-based reflection of the living world. The thing that keeps the two separate is an invisible ectoplasmic curtain or wall known as the Shroud. She directed him through one of the rarest places in existence, where the dead and living can walk between worlds, a break in the Shroud known as the Rupture. They needed the advantage of the Rupture provided by being warded on the Shadowlands side of the forest. It kept the wraiths at bay.
No one comes has been untouched by human hands for countless generations. They can't see it, but the closeness of the Shadowlands usually drives them away, came the elder's voice in his head again as they neared a group of large boulders. Though she gave the appearance of being unfazed by any of this, the fact that she chose to communicate in this way for the moment revealed otherwise. Far from being reassuring, it increased his anxiety. Had he been alone, he most certainly would have turned back by now.
"I think here would be a good place to stop for a while," the elder said aloud, as she sat on a boulder and arranged her shawl about her shoulders. It was a reflexive action to the now frigid temperature, and she couldn't help but to feel grateful that the extreme drop had no effect on them. Her spooked companion took in the expanse of gloomy forest and the creepy apparition of the village that was still too close for comfort, silently grateful that they were not going anywhere near it or further up the mountain. His beast roared, urging him to run for his unnatural life. He glanced at his mentor, who was outwardly calm as ever, and wondered what on earth she was thinking of to have brought him to such a damned place. He had no interest in knowing what else lay ahead of them, that was for sure. If the elder was aware of the intensity of his fear, she was hiding it well, as tended to be her way. He could only feel ashamed at having exhibited cowardice, though in principle he had always been anything but weak. But this was unprecedented.
I am listening,
he said quietly, finding his courage as he sat down beside her.